They classify the 1625 edition of Jasher as a historical fiction book. It's kind of like the Left Behind series. People read the book and thought it was actual theology, when in reality, the Left Behind series was a fictional book that took off and they made movies about it, but was never meant to be perceived as, or it was never meant to be embraced as a fiction book. The guy that wrote the book made a whole lot of money too. So, but it was a common practice during the medieval time frame was to create books and put somebody else's name on it. Now, there's a whole lot of money in selling ancient books. Even if the ancient books are forgery, there's a whole lot of money in selling these books. The copy that most people have, I say, well, I can say that the copy that most people have is the 1625 edition. Now, let's find some other discrepancies in the book of Jasher, the current copy that contradicts the Bible. Um, Jasher claims that Abraham's age in Haran was 50 years old. The Bible says he was 75. Jasher reports that Methuselah was 960 years old. The Bible, I believe, says he was 969. Jasher claims that there was 15 plagues in Egypt. The Bible says there's 10. The book of Jasher says that there was 12 paths created in the crossing of the Red Sea, one for each tribe. The Bible says there was one path created. And the chapter 10, the, the, the chapter 10 analogy, or the chapter 10 record of where the family of Noah went, was the deal breaker that caused the historians to place the 1625 edition of Jasher as a forgery. Um, so that is the pretty much the conclusion of Jasher. So basically, what you have in your possession, if you have the book that was published by Joseph Ben Samuels, you have a forgery in your book. And during the medieval times was a time of forgeries. People were creating forgeries all the time for the purpose of making money. Now, the other half of the coin is people will say, well, we're teaching lessons from the book, and even though some of the stuff is wrong, they kind of like meant well. Well, they might have meant well, but unfortunately, when you take a book that's a forgery and classify it as a pseudepigraphical book, and you start quoting from a forgery or quoting from a pseudepigraphical book in a conversation with people that know their stuff, they're going to think you got a fever. They're going to think that you got some serious, problems with your research. Now, I'm going to say this. Every teaching pastor has a toolbox. And in his toolbox, there's certain things everyone has to have. Now, if you are a teaching pastor and you're leading a congregation, it is very important that you have some knowledge of the Greek and Hebrew. The reason why I'm saying that, because when you come to situations like this, you can go to the Hebrew and you can say what the Hebrew says, and did this get lost in translation? And yes, it got lost in translation. The translation from the KJV gives you impression that this is an actual person that wrote an actual book. So there are basically three books floating around. One was written in 1840 by a guy named Samuel Moses, and the other one was written in the 11th century. All three books are considered forgery. So is the book of Jasher an actual book? Well, it never was a book. It was always, well, the term or the sentence or the statement, the book of the righteous ones, was never referring to an actual book. It was always referring to the books of the Tanakh, the books of the Bible. At least that's what the second century rabbis considered the book, or considered the sentence to be directed towards the books of the Bible. So, with that being said, you have to do better research, and you have to make sure you find out that you have the correct book in your possession. You can trust the 66 books of the Bible. Those are the books you should be studying. As far as the apocryphal books, the pseudographical books, Jubilee, I'm going to do a complete study of Jubilee next, and I'm going to demonstrate how Jubilee contradicts the Bible. Enoch is another book that's going to be one of the books I do a lecture on. Now, Enoch contradicts the Bible in a major way. The whole entire biblical theology says that it is man that introduced sin in the world because of the downfall of man. Enoch says that the angels are the ones are responsible for the downfall of men, and they have a lot of created beings and names for angels that were made up. So, a little bit on Enoch before I close this lecture. Pretty much every church on this planet concluded that Enoch was a make believe fable, and they stopped reading from it, and they actually stopped considering to be a viable resource. The only church that actually considered Enoch to be God breathed was the Ethiopian church. They considered it to be God breathed. I don't understand how you're going to take a book and say it was God breathed when it contradicts Genesis. So it creates confusion. So I'm going to say this: whenever a spiritual teacher or a pastor allows a virus to be introduced into his theological teachings, that virus corrupts all the good data. So if you have a congregation that's mixing pseudographical books, apocryphal books, books that have been considered to be of a lesser authority, books that contradict the Bible, and they're mixing it in with the information in the books that are considered the canon, the 66 books of the Bible, you're going to be having a conversation with someone who's quoting books that are rejected by the most. Of course, the Council of Trent said the Apocrypha was God breathed, but the reformers rejected the Apocrypha based on the formula that the Hebrews used. So I think I said this once before. So whenever a pastor introduces books that are not considered to be God breathed or books that are considered to be of a lesser authority, you create a virus in your theological system. And that means the people that go there are going to be uploading a virus into their theological system. And unfortunately, their theology becomes perverted. So when you start leaning towards incorrect information versus the correct information, the 66 books in the Bible, the accepted canon that most believers are going to roll with and most teachers are going to teach from. So that creates a terrible mess. And unfortunately, when a new believer is introduced to pseudographical books like Enoch, Jubilee, Jasher, Apocrypha, and if they're not really grounded in their word and they really don't understand the workings of the 66 books of the Bible and how they flow together beautifully. And then you see the Apocrypha, Jubilee, Enoch, Jasher. These books contradict the Bible just about in many different areas. Plus, they have make believe stories that never happen. Jubilee has quite a few make believe stories in it, stuff that never happens. Enoch is just a make believe book. It's just Alice in Wonderland theological book. That's all that is. There's about 24 contradictions in the Apocrypha. I'm going to get into that later on. But with that being said, you can trust the 66 books of the Bible. Keep your focus on those books: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the minor prophets, Genesis, the New Testament. Focus on the books that matter and stay away from the weeds because the weeds, they're going to get you messed up. And with that being said, thank you for tuning in to Truth Equal Truth. May God bless you and stay in the right word.